Welcome to Embedded. I am Elecia White, here with Christopher White. Remember when we asked if you wanted a show about making BLE iOS apps? Enough of you said yes that we found an expert to speak with us.
Somebody better than me.
We can compare Christopher's experience with Gretchen Walker's.
Hi, Gretchen. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Could you tell us about yourself as though we met at an embedded systems conference?
Sure. Well, my name is Gretchen Walker, as you said. I'm a mobile software engineer specializing in iOS apps for Bluetooth connected products. So I work remotely right now for a design services company called PunchThrough, which is based in Minneapolis. And I've been living in San Francisco and working for PunchThrough for the past 5 years or so.
PunchThrough sounds familiar. You make LightBlue.
Yes. You've used it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's
extensively.
I love to hear that. We love to hear
for years.
That. That is so awesome. We love to hear that.
Okay, well, we'll talk more about what that is and why you'd use it. But first, we want to do lightning round, where we ask you short questions and want short answers. Are you ready?
I am ready.
If you had a complete blank check, what iOS app would you want to write?
Oh, gosh, that's a curveball. I have to think about that. I don't think I have a good answer for that off the top of my head. Is that okay?
Yes.
Sorry. That one threw me.
Which is more exciting to you, machine learning or virtual reality?
Well, I don't know a lot about either. Like, I've never played around with either, but I think they're both exciting in their own way, obviously, but I think virtual reality is cool. I think even more so, I think augmented reality is cool, just because, you can use it's already happening with just like your basic devices. And I kind of love that interaction between the phone and your environment and like the virtual space. So I think that's what I prefer.
What do you like to listen to when programming, if anything?
I actually cannot listen to music while programming.
Like the second person who said that.
Really? Yeah, I feel like everybody else in my office does. I've tried, I could maybe do something with no words, but otherwise it just kind of distracts me. I might have to be in the right mood and I could listen to like some, EDM or something, even though that's not actually what I listen to normally. But I probably couldn't listen to any music that I normally would because I'd probably get too into it and get distracted.
Do you have a favorite programming language?
Well, I feel like my favorite programming language just depends on what I'm using the most, because you get used to it. And then when you switch to something else, you're like, God, what is all this stuff? Why do they do it this way? So I don't know if you can relate to that.
I need semicolons.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I've been writing in Swift, or most of the time Swift, and some Objective-C for the last 5 years. So Swift is probably has to be my default favorite. Python's also nice because it's just something anyone can pick up. But yeah, as far as practicality, then I would have to think about it for why I like a language for more academic reasons.
Do you have a tip everyone should know?
Can it be non-technical?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So for anyone out there who's an awkward dancer, that's me for sure. I don't know if anyone else feels like they don't like dancing in public. So the number one thing that you could do that you probably aren't doing enough of is just bending your knees. And I mean really bending your knees and just sitting into them. Because my whole life I was one of those people who hated dancing in public. And a couple of years ago, I decided I needed to do something about it. So I started taking dance classes of just all different kinds. And the biggest takeaway was just to remember to keep your knees soft, and it gives you a much better just range of motion around across the rest of your body.
All right. I want to ask you about BLE iOS apps now.
Sure.
Say as a hypothetical that I'm an embedded software engineer working on a BLE device peripheral, and I want an app to show off to my clients to make sure that my clients are aware of the work I'm doing. And I have an iPhone. What do I do? Where do I start?
Well, you have an iPhone, so that's a great start. Next thing you need is Xcode, which is the IDE that Apple provides to develop for any of their platforms. And that's free, but it can only be run on a Mac. So if you don't have one,
free.
That's much less free. If you don't have one, just, go out, drop a couple $1,000s. And, so yeah, sorry, Windows users. But it is Mac only. And that's classic Apple, isn't it? So that's the first things you'll need. And then you'll probably want to get an Apple developer account of some kind. So you mentioned distribution of your app. So in that case, you would need like the standard, it's $99 a year. So drop a little more money on a standard developer account. And so that will allow you to build releases and distribute via the App Store or Test Flight for to beta testers. But if you just want to play around and develop for yourself, you can start out with just like a free account, which I think they have now. And the only drawback with that is, you can't distribute. And then also I think the builds that you put onto your phone are going to expire after like 7 days. So it's just for, at home use.
You mentioned Test Flight. What is that?
Test Flight is a tool for distributing like beta builds of your app to other people. And originally it was a third-party tool, but Apple bought it. It was one of the most popular, so Apple bought it and integrated it into their platform. So now it's just the Apple tool that you use to distribute your beta builds without going through the App Store.
And it works kind of like the App Store, right? That the interface to submit things is the same. They actually review it a little bit, which I found to be quite annoying.
Oh, yeah.
So you get kind of used to the experience of what it's like dealing with the App Store review process, a little microcosm. It's not quite as bad, but
it is. Yeah. That's that's if you. There's actually 2 ways to distribute via Test Flight. So you can. It sounds like you went through. Adding external testers. And then you might have also seen there's the option to add internal testers. And if you do, that means you have to actually add people to your account and you can just give them minimal permissions. But yeah, that's probably not sustainable for if you have like a wide base of users you want to distribute to. But it does mean you get to bypass the App Store submission or review process that you ran into, which is especially annoying for Bluetooth devices. Did you run into that?
Yeah, they rejected me about 4 times before I finally figured out the right incantations in the info P list for the permissions they wanted. And I think I had to put in warnings too, like, hey, this uses Bluetooth, a pop-up message and stuff. And
yeah, and they find different steps of the way to reject you. They break it up into different steps. So it's not just like you build it and then you upload it and they tell you right away if it's wrong. There's like 4 steps that you have to go through, and each of those they could just reject you and then you have to go through them all again. Yeah, so Apple kind of likes to have fun there with their developers.
So what is involved with releasing through Test Flight? What's a plist?
A plist. So it's actually, I think it's an XML file under the surface. Yeah. The source is an XML file, but it's just basically a list of, it's a really simple just representation of, I think it's like a dictionary or an array, usually at the root level. But anyways, it's just like a list of, it depends on the plist. But anyways, it's just a list of keys. The info.plist is probably what you're thinking of. That comes with every app, and that just lets you input. There's certain like settings for your app, and then keys that you mentioned, like this app uses Bluetooth. So you have to have that key for the app to even, run on a phone and use Bluetooth. If you don't have that key, then the second your app tries to run, it'll crash as soon as you try to use anything with the Bluetooth library. So there's stuff like that, or, it needs certain, other permissions like the camera, or it needs to be able to run Bluetooth in the background. So that's where you specify things like that.
So when Chris made the app, in order to get it on my phone to test with my devices, I had to give him my Apple ID. And then Test Flight invited me?
Yep. So you will need to either, if you're doing like the external testing route, which it did sound like you went through, I think you can just use any email. I might be wrong there. Well, yeah, okay, maybe it does have to be an Apple ID, actually. I'm not sure. I know if it's an internal tester, it definitely does, because you add them to your Apple developer account, and that's got to be an Apple ID. But yeah, for external testers too, maybe it does have to be an Apple ID. And so what that's going to look like on the user side is they have TestFlight downloaded, and then the first time you release a build to them, they should get like an email from TestFlight, and so they have to go into their email, not into TestFlight. That's a mistake people make. And so they go to the email, and you have to click the link to download the app, or it'll open in TestFlight or something. And then from there, you can use TestFlight to get updated builds. But yeah, the first time you have to go through the email, and people don't necessarily realize that, and they're like, why isn't it showing up in TestFlight?
Well, the whole TestFlight thing was kind of confusing. I mean, it's good that it's there because you don't have to go through the whole app store and you don't have to show off things that aren't ready. But as somebody who talks to our clients and has to explain, well, you do this and then this and then this and this and this and this. And then finally you program the boards with the firmware I give you and you can try it out.
I know.
Yeah.
They don't make it easy. And it's all about the security and wanting to make sure you sign and provision the app properly. But yeah, I don't know if you've ever tried distributing on Android, what that's like in comparison. Have you ever done that?
I've been near people who've done that.
That's close enough. Yeah. So Android, you're just going to, build a release, and you get a .apk file. That's the app file. And you can just drop that onto somebody's phone and it'll run, and that's it.
Yeah. It is cumbersome, but it does have some nice features, right? Because the user, if they have a problem, it automatically does a screenshot. You can submit stuff and report things right from the app, and then it'll go straight to the developer. And they get a backtrace and a screenshot and a description of the bug. So it has some nice features, but it is rather painful to go through.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's true. There's trade-offs.
Okay. So that's all. I guess that's before the app is knowing about Xcode and Mac, and after the app is knowing about TestFlight and distributing it at least to your team. But as I'm developing the app, what do I need to know? Do I have to use Swift? Should I use Swift? Is there something else I should use?
Yeah, so Swift is definitely the way to go these days. You don't have to use it, but I'd heavily recommend it. The other option is Objective-C, and yeah, trust me, one look at their method syntax and you'll never want to come back. Swift is definitely what Apple's pushing these days and what they want you to use. So what Apple wants, Apple gets.
It looks pretty C-like to me.
Swift?
Yeah. The syntax, just...
Some of it.
Some of it is, yeah. It's a weird hybrid of there's some C things, there's some things that are a little bit more like, I don't know, maybe a little more like Python or Ruby or something, where it's very kind of clean. You don't have, your semicolons or anything like that. And then they have some of their own just sort of unique syntax, like returns you indicate a return with you draw out an arrow with a dash and a right caret and put the return type. So I don't know. But it's actually what it is kind of similar to is Kotlin, which is Android's version of Swift that they came out with. So if you're familiar with that and you're moving from Android to iOS, you'll be in good shape.
For an embedded developer coming from C, it's kind of jarring, right? Because it's not, it's an object-oriented language, but that Apple pushes is protocol-oriented stuff. There's a lot of more generic language concepts that somebody has to become familiar with, coming from straight procedural C.
Right. Yeah. You're not using those raw types ever, like you use in C. And so in that sense, maybe Objective-C be more comfortable with, but Swift is just more.
No, I've tried that.
That's the thing.
I'd rather learn something totally different.
You honestly, I'd feel the same way. You're right. You're right. You definitely should. Swift is definitely the way to go. Like any language, takes some getting used to. And like I said before, it's any new language you feel like, oh, why do they do things like this? It's so much better in the language I usually use. But then you get used to it and it gets better.
Do you have any suggestions for resources to kind of learn Swift from the beginning?
I mean, yeah, obviously they have their docs, but that's not necessarily something that's user-friendly to just dive into. So personally, I don't know if they actually have a tutorial, but on Swift specifically, but, are you familiar with like Ray Wenderlich? I think that's how you say his name. Yeah. I mean, they have tutorials for everything. And that, they probably have some resource for Swift, but yeah, I can't think of like a specific guide that I remember using. Yeah,
no, I remember when I was learning, I did a bunch of the tutorials on that site, so that was really good. Some of the other stuff I used, there's a couple of books from Big Nerd Ranch that I liked. And those were good, but
is it Big Nerd or Big Ranch? Is it Big Nerd Ranch or Big Nerd Ranch?
I don't know. I never really thought about it until now.
Go on.
But and then there's a bunch of Udemy classes and stuff, but really the way Ray Wenderlich's site and the books were the best. But there was some learning curve, at least for me.
There always is.
So does Swift work with Bluetooth? I mean, you've told me I should use Swift, and I already said I was doing Bluetooth. So there must be something to connect them. Library, framework, what is it?
Sure. So the core Bluetooth, Apple provides this library called Core Bluetooth, and that is what you would use to interact with Core Bluetooth, with Bluetooth devices on, iOS, macOS, I think also maybe TV and watchOS. So that's what you would use.
And is this Bluetooth like the old Bluetooth that was audio or BLE?
Yeah, this is actually, it's not clear, but it's technically was developed for Bluetooth Low Energy. And there was a separate library for interacting with Bluetooth Classic devices. And the way Bluetooth Classic works is super different. And I'm not even very familiar with it because it's not something we are asked to do really anymore. Everyone's kind of using Bluetooth Low Energy. And these days there's actually, they're trying to move towards more of a hybrid I think now the Bluetooth Low Energy stack or spec, I think, is going to support, or already supports, adding like a GAT table, which used to be like a Bluetooth Low Energy specific thing, adding a GAT table to a Bluetooth Classic device. And so if the peripheral supports that, then you can now, they have a new API in Core Bluetooth to be able to retrieve those kinds of devices and connect to them and read their GAT table, and then you use the same APIs to read their GAT table and all that. And I haven't played around with that too much because I haven't really found a device that works like that. But that's kind of exciting.
So what does Core Bluetooth give you? What kinds of things will it do for you? Or at what level is it kind of at?
Extremely high, extremely high level. If you are at the point that you've already developed like an embedded BLE device and gotten it working, or even gotten it halfway working, you probably know more than you even needed to work with Core Bluetooth successfully. If you just know your basics of Bluetooth, you've got, two roles that a device can take on, the central and the peripheral role. The peripheral role is probably your embedded device in this case, and it's going to be advertising, and the central is going to want to scan for that device and connect to it and discover its services and characteristics, and then read and write and subscribe to notifications on those characteristics. I basically just described the API and what it looks like. That's just what the API looks like. Like those are the calls. They don't get more complex than that. It's so it handles a lot under the surface, which also means it occludes a lot from you. So there's a lot of control that you might want to have that you won't have, and a lot of visibility that you won't have into what's really going on, and just certain parts of the Bluetooth stack and the process. So It's
that's
good
my
and bad.
second question: is what doesn't it do?
Yeah,
Doesn't tell you when it completes things.
Well,
well, yeah. So there's it's I'd say that like one of the biggest things that people complain about, and especially we our clients will expect to be able to do this, and then we have to explain that that there's no insight is pairing and bonding. So
God.
if you are familiar with that, like what pairing and bonding technically is different from just a standard connection. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yeah. If you want any security at all, you have to do the pairing and bonding. You have to type in the number that it gives you. And then
which iOS just pops up randomly when it feels like it.
Yes.
Yes. It's not part of your app.
No.
And then it creates this bond that they can talk, which you can never get rid of unless you go to the secret place in the settings menu and tell it to forget the device. Although we're going to talk a little bit about that. But yes, pairing and bonding. It's horrible.
Exactly. So it's something you do want because it's a standard security. So a lot of devices you will want to have that. But it does just create all these issues because, like you said, your app has no idea. Like you'll get, you'll call connect to a device and it will technically connect because that's a separate thing from pairing and bonding. That, pairing and bonding comes after connection. So you get your did connect call back and you think you're ready to go. But then you might still, it also depends on how pairing and bonding is triggered. There's a couple of ways. It can either be like on connection, or the way Apple likes you to do it is you have like an encrypted characteristic. And when you try to read from that or write to it, that's going to trigger pairing and bonding. But again, you just don't know when that dialogue's popped up and if the user said yes, or if they're just sitting there and not noticing it. So, and then like you said, again, you just can't, you have no control over, you don't even know if the device is like a bonded type device or, and you can't, clear it yourself. You have to tell the user, hey, like if you want to actually clear this device, you got to go to settings and clear it and forget it. And you can't even deep link to that menu. You have to you can link them to settings, but just the high level page. So it's, that's the kind of stuff that Core Bluetooth frustratingly does obscure from you.
At the risk of asking you to do my homework for me, what I ended up doing is, since I want it to pair and I don't want the user to be ambiguous, as soon as I connect, I go ahead and just randomly read one of the encrypted characteristics I know is out there to force it to pop that up if it's going to.
Yep.
You mentioned a way to do it on Connect, but you said Apple doesn't like that.
They have this accessory design guidelines PDF that they've put out, and it's huge, but there's a section on Bluetooth, and it lists all of the rules that it likes you to follow. It likes its devices to follow. So one of them is says that it prefers the encrypted the insufficient authentication method of bonding or triggering pairing and bonding, which is reading from an encrypted characteristic. But I don't actually know what it looks like on the firmware side because it's not my wheelhouse. But there is a way you can configure on the firmware side to also just do like I think on connecting, and then you can also configure it to whether it should just be like it's called just works, where it just pairs and bonds, and it doesn't pop up that, it pops up the pairing, like, do you want a pair dialog, but it doesn't do the pin number. You can configure whether it should enter a pin or just, give you a pop-up.
You have to have the pin or it's really not secure.
I don't know.
You're stuck getting the pin, Christopher. There's no way to do it without the pin.
She's doing the firmware, so I'm glancing at her, going, "Hey, maybe you should try that." And she's saying, "No."
I'm not sure I could speak to how much extra security having the pin provides. I mean, because it's really just from one side, right? Just making sure that. Well, I guess it depends where you're getting that pin number from, because sometimes it's something that's like printed on the device. But yeah, I mean, usually if you really want to like have proper security with Bluetooth, you probably want to just have your own layer of encryption on top of the Bluetooth encryption, at the app level. So I'm not sure. I don't know if I could speak to how much the pin itself really provides.
It provides against casual intrusion. And for example, the app we're working on, I have dev info outside the pair bond because you can read that on Connect. You don't have to know anything about the system. Devinfo is the GAT, which is the list of characteristics that is standard on Bluetooth that describes a device. It's the device info. And so, yeah, I have that outside. And so he has to read one of the encrypted things in order to get bonded.
Okay.
And sense. Our pins are set in manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And then he has to go to a website in order to get the pin for this device. So it's pretty complicated. But it is more secure than having your pin be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the default TI password. And so many people still use it. It's not a good pin.
Yep. I've definitely seen that before, too many times. But yeah, I suppose I really, it always, like everything, it comes down to your use case. Like, is that something that you want to have to make users do? Or like, a lot of the time we're working with, certain medical devices and you have an older population maybe. And so then you have to worry about, any extra step in the process and like numbers they have to look up. It might be, easier to or for a better user experience to handle the encryption and the security elsewhere. That's more under the surface.
Well, that's actually now I am going to ask you to do my homework for me. We do set the pin in manufacturing and then it's on a server. And the iOS app has to go ask the server what the pin is.
iOS app, I can't provide the pin.
And so I think you're going to put the pin on the screen, and then when it pops up to the user and
they're
says...
going to have to type it.
It has to copy from the app to the iOS pop-up.
I can't do that. They're going to have to type it.
There's no way to avoid that?
No. The pairing pop-up is from the system.
That's silly.
I don't even know it's there.
Yep.
Yeah. You're just going to have to put up the pin number for that device.
Please type what this says right here. That's what we're going to have to do.
That's silly.
Yep. That's what they make you do.
Okay, so I've heard through some shouting that the message passing system is complicated. And it's all messages, and there's no. I mean, is there? I'm an embedded developer. There should be something that's like the initialization section, and then there should be the loop, and you should just do loop over and over again, with occasional interrupt that sends you maybe an event to the loop. That's how it works, right? That's how all computers work.
No.
That is probably. There is your app does have a main loop that you don't touch really. That's actually in C, and that's a file you'll never probably touch when you're developing an iOS app. But the way that Apple and their APIs handle asynchronous callbacks is via delegation, which a lot of people don't like. I don't even think Apple likes it anymore. They did eventually start introducing some APIs or some alternative methods within APIs that use you pass in as a parameter, you pass in a Lambda function, and so then you can then at least your code where you call the method and then the callback code is all in one place, maybe in the same function, and so that's just so much better for readability, I think, and I think that's what most people prefer. But delegation. I don't want to get too much in the details of it, but it does mean that you have your callback methods are going to be in a completely different place from where you called the original code, and that does mean that you have to then to remember what was going on. You have to store state in static class variables, which is kind of gross. Usually you want to avoid doing that too much. So that's why people have been moving towards other paradigms. They block-based callbacks are nice. And then sort of expanding on that, the RX pattern has become more and more popular. There's an RX Swift library. I think there's actually 2 out there that make everything more reactive. And so people have been trying to get around Apple's initial API designs for forever.
Well, Apple just introduced Combine, which is their version of RX.
Yep.
So I guess they'll start doing that. Yeah, I found the whole API really frustrating and kind of unswift-like. Mm-hmm.
It's Objective-C, I guess.
Yeah. And I just keep getting in corners where stuff will happen because it's just these callbacks, and there's only one, like you said, there's these delegates, which is like an object that gets called back, and there's only one of them. So like if I'm in a different section of the Bluetooth stuff I'm working on, dealing with a different part of the peripheral, I still get the callback in the same place. And so it's like, okay, what does this pertain to? Oh, this isn't what I was. So there's like this implicit state you have to maintain, like, oh, I was thinking about this, but now I just got a message from Bluetooth that's about this, and that's not what I'm thinking about right now. So I shouldn't have got that message. Very weird.
I feel your pain. Delegates are definitely a one-to-one kind of relationship thing. So if you find yourself, you have multiple classes that kind of need to access those, you could pass the delegate handler off, assign each class to the delegate property of the main class, but that's not great. So the other way to do it is then implement kind of like a notification layer. You can use like internal app notifications to notify multiple different classes of what's happening. That's probably what I'd recommend if you're just quick building some like a little layer on top of that.
Okay. So you just said that's what you'd recommend. Okay, so Swift, core Bluetooth, and RX or Combine.
No, I wouldn't recommend that.
I wouldn't start with
delegates, but do something with classes and delegates.
Yeah, I would go with the delegate stuff to begin with. Yeah, because that's that's the simplest path forward. It's not the end of the world, especially if you're building something simple and more of just like a prototype kind of deal.
And that's really where I'm asking my questions from, is a prototype sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Because as an embedded engineer, what I most likely want it to do is be able to say, here are all of the things the device can do. Go give this to a shiny app company who can make it pretty. Yeah. How much do I need to know about all the other things about BLE, all the power management and GATs and characteristics and read, notify, write, and that sort of thing? Do I need to know those, or can I just kind of glide through? Will it work for me? Will it explain things as I go with core Bluetooth?
I mean, I don't know if the docs are as straightforward as they could be. Probably want to find a tutorial, and hint, we have a blog post about this that will help you out. But yeah, the power management stuff, absolutely, you don't have to worry about. You don't really have any control over that, other than just kind of minor things you can do to worry about the phone's battery life. But the services and characteristics, it's these very high level object representations of what they are. So you'll just see you have everything in core Bluetooth APIs prefixed with CB for core Bluetooth. So you'll have a CB service and a CB peripheral, and each CB service has an array of CB characteristics, and they all have like a UUID property and maybe like the descriptors on them, and then the characteristics have a value property, and that's just like a data type, a Swift data type object. So that's if that sounds reasonably straightforward, then and hopefully it does, then that's all you need to know.
You said before that if I had programmed the BLE side on the device, I probably would already be there. And yeah, that's what it sounds like. But if I haven't, I wouldn't start with core Bluetooth. I would learn about Bluetooth first.
Yeah. And even Bluetooth, I think that's there's a lot to know about it, especially if you are working on the embedded side. But yeah, from a mobile standpoint, you really just need to know like the basics of kind of how Bluetooth organizes data and what the buzzwords are.
Well, back to the delegation buzzword. One of the reasons it's there is because everything in Bluetooth or BLE is very asynchronous. You don't nothing happens in real time because you're going over a wireless network. And so when I say I want to know the value of this characteristic, it goes off, it does it, it eventually calls you back and says it was this. And as Chris was saying, you may be doing something else entirely by the time you get that notification.
Right.
Is there a way to organize the code that makes it easier to deal with the asynchronous nature of it all?
I think that is, if that is something that you're very concerned about and you don't like the whole, having to use it, again, it's so use case dependent. So it's hard to like imagine, I guess, what your needs are. But, if it is something that's just really bothering you, then maybe that is when you want to look into either writing your own kind of layer on top of core Bluetooth, which we've done for clients, developing SDKs that we've written like an RX layer on top of on top of the core Bluetooth library, or we'll write, or you can write like a more block based layer on top, and so that will then give you code that's more you call your code, and then you have the callback code in the same place, and so you can access like local variables you might have defined when you called it and stuff like that. So that's probably the best route forward if you're not happy with just having to store state in class variables or wherever.
Yeah, and the delegation thing, that's one of Apple's design patterns they loved for a long time until they didn't. So
yep.
they stuck that on all kinds of stuff. I also found error handling to be a pain, and I think this goes along with the asynchronous stuff. And this may just be an iOS app thing, and I'm not good at it, but it seems like when I get a notification from Bluetooth down in the delegate, bubbling an error up to where it makes sense to have some context about what it's about is really tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice for error handling for Bluetooth?
So are the errors you're talking about like errors that you want to send from your device up to, or are you just thinking more like interpreting the other errors that core Bluetooth has built in?
There's something I might want to present to the user, like I got disconnected, or trying to think of another one at the moment.
Right.
But,
so being able to interpret the the errors that core Bluetooth might bubble back up to you, and then being able to interpret that for the user. Yeah, that's
failing too.
Bond failing. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Bond failing. I mean, that might come. I don't. So this is one of my biggest problems with core Bluetooth is the errors that they can send you are extremely poorly documented. Basically, almost not documented. Like they list them all. But there's no indication of when they might send them. And not to mention, there's also two different. So like, you have an error, like an NS error or an error superclass. And then there's actually two different types of CB errors. There's like CB error and CB at error, which is to do with like specifically the at profile. Yeah, but there's no indication of, if you might get one of those types versus the other. And so you have to cast it to find out and see like, okay, is this a CB error or is this a CB at error? And then from there, you can try to handle all of the different errors that they could give you. But again, you don't know which methods are likely to for sure give you them back, or which errors are actually still in use. There's probably some old ones that aren't. I don't know. So yeah, that's one of those things where we don't end up really. A lot of the time, we don't end up really doing a lot of very specific error handling. It's just because we don't see those errors too often. So, like a device disconnection would be that's not even an error. It's like either a did disconnect callback or failed to connect callback, and so that's easy. But it's hard to even think of specific examples of other errors because I don't really.
I'm probably encountering more errors because we're both developing at the same time. So it may not be something that's realistic to worry about, but if I see them, then I start getting worried because, this might happen in real use. So,
hey, I apologized that I hadn't byte swapped everything yet, okay?
You did. Some things were just swapped differently than others.
I think I might be spoiled because the firmware I end up working with is from people who have been working with Bluetooth and embedded devices for a while. So I probably get a little bit spoiled not seeing some errors that maybe like a more fresh to BLE embedded developer might be producing, but so maybe I have a skewed point of view on how often those come up.
It's developing a custom GAT more than anything else, trying to decide how to display things.
Yeah.
And we're using TI's firmware update SDK, which does its own things. So we get errors from that are just like, oh, everything's destroyed.
I've used that stack before a long time ago. These days, I feel like every project I work on, a lot of people use Nordic. Not every project, it's Nordic's probably the most popular one.
Yes, and with good reason.
Yeah, I think they definitely have the most.
I've used both multiple times in multiple generations. Choose Nordic.
Yep.
Sorry, TI.
That's my takeaway too. I'm not an embedded engineer, so I don't really have to deal with it, but I do have to kind of deal with the fallout from it.
You mentioned a blog post. I believe that is the ultimate guide to Apple's core Bluetooth that's on the PunchThrough blog.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. That's the
Which
one.
I wish existed 2.5 months ago.
I know, it just came out. It was written and then, it had a lot of editing and stuff to go through. But yes, that just came out in like the last month or two. So actually our blog is a really great resource. I do recommend it. I know it's our blog, but I would definitely suggest it as a resource for not just there. We do have these two ultimate guides that we've released this past year for Bluetooth on mobile. So we have one for Android and one for iOS. And if you think the iOS one looks comprehensive, the Android one is just insane. It's awesome. My coworker just did a fantastic job putting that together, but because there's so much more to know about Android BLE than there is for iOS, I'd say.
Why is that?
Well, it's more complicated. It's more, the biggest reason, is because you are dealing suddenly with not just a single manufacturer, you're dealing with, just wide range of manufacturers,
right,
and they
yes.
each have their own different Bluetooth chipset, and they also might have their own different like fork of Android, which could include, especially with Bluetooth, since they're interacting with different hardware, it might include like internal tweaks to the Bluetooth stack, the Android Bluetooth stack. So it might work differently. And then and then also the versions are way more, you have a much wider range of Android versions being actively used across, depending on the make and model of the device. So, between all of that just creates a lot of problems with Android.
I'm remembering now,
really.
Fitbit, we had many serious issues with that.
Bringing back memory. Did you block this out?
Yeah. Well, I didn't work on Android, so I only heard the screaming from other people. So
yeah, that's my life too. I just sit here on iOS.
Why is Samsung killing our app? Oh, just because it feels like it.
Yep. Oh yeah. God, Samsung's the worst because they're the most prolific. That's not, Google. They're the most prolific, I would say phone that has a really just a different stack and a different their own fork of Android and different chipset than like what Google uses. And since Google controls they own Android, they control the API these days and the OS. So yeah.
Well, I want to go through the posts a little bit. You wrote the ultimate guide to Apple's core Bluetooth. There's one about unit testing Android BLE code with RX Android BLE, which I guess is a unit testing system. There's the ultimate guide to the Android, I guess not core Bluetooth, but whatever that is, and using RX versus delegates with core Bluetooth.
Oh, that just came out.
So there are a lot of resources here that describe how to solve the problems that we're all looking at when we're trying to start doing app development.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that those were mentioned. And then LightBlue. Tell us about LightBlue.
So LightBlue is the app that you'll want to use if everything we just described sounds horribly time-consuming and exhausting, and you're scared.
This is true. I mean, I use LightBlue before I have an app to develop with.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's really, I think, useful for. But it's one of many potential functions for that app. So yeah, if So it's an app. LightBlue is an app that we developed first to privately test our own in-house Bluetooth devices way back in 2011, 2012, which is when Bluetooth 4.0, which is Bluetooth Low Energy, first came out on, I think it was the iPhone 4S. And so, yeah, we were already working with that. And so you can use LightBlue. And then we realized, we might as well release this to other people so they can use it too. There wasn't any, similar tools at the time available on the App Store. So it's still available free, and you can use it to, scan for and connect to your devices, examine services and characteristics, read, write, subscribe, export your log data. And you can even, and this is one of my favorite features, configure and emulate your own peripheral device. So if you want to go on the other side of things and have your phone act as a peripheral, you can completely configure it top to bottom.
I haven't done that yet. I thought about doing that when I thought Chris was going to be ahead of me in iOS development, but I caught up, and so my device was mostly ready for him. I have also used NRF Connect, which is similar. It shows you the characteristics and lets you connect and bond. Yep. Pair and bond or whatever. And it lets you do the over-the-air firmware updates for Nordic if that's what you're using, if you're using their code.
Yes.
But LightBlue has a nice interface and is pretty reliable, so I use it a lot.
That's great to hear. Yeah, and each app has different things that they probably are better suited for. So our feelings aren't hurt if you also find Nordic's app useful. It's something that we are always trying to build out LightBlue when we have time internally, because primarily we are a contracting company. So we're working on other external projects, but it's, whenever we do have a little downtime for our mobile engineers, we're always trying to add to it and take, get suggestions from users and, look at what our own firmware engineers need to try to build up, the next big feature for LightBlue. So, and it is available on Android and Mac OS as well.
One of the things I really liked about it at Fitbit was we didn't really have a low-level kind of config app. I mean, we had the user-facing app, which doesn't say anything about Bluetooth. It communicates with the devices by Bluetooth, but it doesn't. You're not interrogating characteristics as a user. It's connecting to your watch and showing you all the important data. But as a developer, there was no separate like dev app to kind of, okay, I need to look at this device and see what these things specifically are in these configurations. So it was nice to have that on the side as well. This is the debug app that I can talk to this Bluetooth device and look at everything I need to look at without it being massaged through the user-facing code.
It's kind of like inspecting your HTML pages, your web pages.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, and you can interact with it too. And it's funny you mentioned Fitbit because that's it's a funny, completely unintended use case for LightBlue. But people have a lot of people, like at this point, it seems like hundreds to thousands of people have turned to LightBlue to find their lost smartwatches. And we have Fitbit to thank for that, actually, because I guess they list us on their website as a resource if you've lost your device. So you can use LightBlue basically it's not what it was written for at all. So it's not something we necessarily explicitly cater towards, but you can use it because we have the little signal strength indicator on the scan list. You can use it as like kind of a game of like warmer, colder, and walk around your house. And a lot of people have found their Fitbits that way, which makes us happy.
That should have been your tip.
Yeah, actually, that is a good tip. I scratch it. That's my tip. I always tell my mom that tip, and she never remembers to use it, but she's always losing her Fitbit.
I mentioned that we created a custom GATS because we had specific information. But I also mentioned that we used an off-the-shelf standard Bluetooth one, the device information. And I've used the battery one before. And a lot of people use the UART service that makes your device act like it's a UART. What is the best way to go about as I'm trying to design the system to make it an easy app, should I have a custom GAT? Should I try to use something off the shelf even if it doesn't quite fit? Or should I just use the UART service for everything? Put my own command handler on top, and that'll be so easy.
So again, it's entirely use case dependent. So the reason to use standard GAT characteristics is usually for broader compatibility with like a variety of central devices and apps that you might want to be able to connect to your device and read things like battery level or heart rate, and then they'll already know what they are and how to format them without you having to write any of that mobile side code. So maybe like just a more interesting question is like how to format your data and turn your GAT table. And so like it just really depends again on your use. So one of the major ways that Bluetooth Low Energy stands apart from Bluetooth Classic is that instead of a single serial stream for all your transmissions, you now have the option to like separate out and define multiple data buckets, data streams for different data types and purposes. So if you have a bunch of different sensors and you want to read information about them, you might designate like a separate characteristic for each of them, and then you can update them in parallel whenever each one has a new value. So you don't need to provide any metadata to the other side to let them know what the value is. The app will just know based on what the characteristic it came from was. But that said, it's very common to default back to that kind of standard serial port paradigm. So often the devices that we work with require, a complex set of commands in both directions to be able to do more complex things like, maybe you're reading like high volume logs or resetting a system component or, performing a firmware update. And so this would require us to define and implement a custom protocol of messages with, various kinds of payloads. And at that point, it's just easier usually to use like a serial type paradigm for communication. So we'd have at least like an RX and TX characteristic, which is similar to like what, UART looks like, over which the majority of the communication occurs. So that's very common in BLE products these days.
It is. It's kind of inefficient. Although as a developer, it's very easy because you can, as an embedded developer, you can just send everything to the serial port as well as the BLE device. And when you're developing, you just type it in the COM port, or in TerraTerm or whatever you're using for a terminal program. But it's usually pretty inefficient and it requires more battery on the device side. And since we're talking about Bluetooth Low Energy, that's usually an important piece of the puzzle, is trying to reduce the overhead on the device side so that you don't have to send as much data or all of the bits you're sending are the important bits and you're not bothering to send the other things.
I think people, first of all, do a little bit overestimate how much power the BLE module draws from, their overall device's battery life. But there are some things you can do to optimize that. And so one of the things would be to, rather than trying to minimize your payloads, you want to, configure your connection parameters so you can kind of have two modes or two or more maybe modes for transmission. So if you are actively trying to transmit data, especially a large amount of data, you'd probably want to go into a higher throughput mode. And so you want to, it's better to maximize your power usage to you'd maybe decrease your connection interval and latency to maximize throughput. And it's better to get a whole bunch of data through quickly than to try to space it out and use less power on each transmission or anything like that. So that and then when you're done, you can go back into a low power mode where you have higher connection intervals and higher latency, and you can kind of just sleep. So that's one way that I guess we deal with that. Does that answer your question at all? Or do you have any others?
I didn't exactly have a question. It was more of a statement that UARTs are fun, but they're not always the best. But they are really useful. And you mentioned configuring the parameters, which is a pretty big thing on the device side.
Yeah.
There's how often do I advertise? How often do I connect? Lots of choices you have about, you mentioned interval. And this gets pretty complicated because you can, for example, with the device we've been working on, for the most part, we're in a situation where we want to be able to talk as far as we can. And so we're fairly low data rate, but lots of space between so that we don't collide into other devices of similar nature. But when we do the firmware update, we're going to assume you're close to us. We want to go as fast as possible to get this over with because it isn't a big pipe. And the firmware update of the device it's going to take a minute or two, and you don't want to stop halfway through.
Right. So
changing these parameters is important on the device side. Do you have any of the same parameters on the phone side?
You really don't. It's another thing that iOS completely obscures. And I think part of the reason is because you're not the only app using Bluetooth. It's still one Bluetooth chip, and it's actually also, well, you're probably not using this as a central, but if you can also go, use the phone as a peripheral, and then in that case, you have a GAT table, and you're sharing the GAT table with everything else on the phone that needs Bluetooth. I think just that's why Apple can't really give you any insight into that. But that said, I think it generally is the embedded device that does all of the requesting and setting of connection parameters, and then the central can reject or accept them. Is that what you found in your experience?
Yes, although Apple only accepts some of them. So, you have to guess some.
Yes, absolutely. And again, Apple has this, I don't know if you've seen it, the Apple design or accessory design guidelines doc. And so, it lists all of those rules there. So it has like rules for what your connection parameters have to be, and sort of some ranges, and then also for advertising intervals, what it suggests using in different situations.
And its range of what it suggests using is smaller than the range that BLE suggests, or that the Bluetooth committee. So you can't just go with defaults all the time, which is very sad.
Yeah, absolutely. I know and that's the frustrating thing is because, especially if you're trying to target Android and iOS, they might have completely different, sometimes opposing, suggestions or best practices. Like for example, like the bonding types, the bonding triggers. So Apple wants you to use insufficient authentication, which means you read from an encrypted characteristic and that triggers bonding. Whereas we've done a lot of tests on a variety of Android devices, and it really, what works best, what's most reliable for the Android device really depends on the manufacturer and the stack. And so for some of them, they seem to prefer insufficient auth. Some of them, it's more just like on connection. And then some of them, maybe it's a little inconclusive. So it's something you just have to
This is why we
consider.
Always answer, it depends.
That's really the answer to everything in software, isn't it? In tech.
And if anybody out there is wondering about how to set those parameters, Mohammed over at novelbits.io has a couple of really good blog posts about maximizing throughput and minimizing power, or whatever your goal is, because BLE has multiple goals, and you have to figure out what you want, and then you have to figure out the parameters to get it.
I will say we also have some great blog posts on that stuff. We've on maximizing throughput. Yep, we have a whole host actually of embedded resources in our blog repertoire. So definitely check those out if you want it. If you're curious.
I will check them out, and I might get a few from you to put in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any things in the iOS app that affects the power of the phone?
That's the kind of thing that's, yes, but it's hard to really pinpoint, and it's not something we worry too much about on the mobile side, just because, first of all, if you're actually trying to measure it, that's not an easy thing to do. You know, it's so hard to set up like a controlled environment with an iPhone where you are really isolating, the effects your app's behavior has on the phone versus just other activity that could be going on. So yeah, when it comes to maximizing like phone battery, it's just kind of what you would think is, you know, if you're constantly waking the app up in the background to do lots of like high volume transfers, which on its own might have limitations, and could get your app killed by the OS if you're doing it too much. But, you know, if you're doing that kind of thing, yeah, that could, or if you're, I don't know, just, yeah, high throughput, maybe, for a long time, like long reads and writes, that could affect it. But yeah, overall, it's not something we have to worry about too much on the iOS side.
Well, Chris, do you have any questions that you wish you'd known when you started, or that you want the answers to now?
She's already answered. I guess the big takeaway is that you have way less control than you do as an embedded developer working on the device side. And so just expect to just do what Apple says and accept it.
Absolutely. Do not try to fight Apple. It won't end well.
Oh, I guess we didn't really talk about debugging at all.
Oh, right. Do you have magical debugging methodologies?
Are you wondering about debugging your, like, help using Xcode and your app to help you debug your Bluetooth device, your embedded device, or are you thinking more about just debugging your own app code?
I think the app code on the iOS device, because debugging my embedded device, I'm probably using LightBlue. But if I were to try to make an iOS device, I mean, do you guys have printf and everything? You don't have a JTAG. I can't connect to the JTAG on the phone.
It's got more than I know how to deal with. I'm very bad with the debugger because it does a lot of things, and I'm not quite sure what they all are. And then they have other things like instruments, which I haven't used very much.
You can play the keyboard?
Yes. But I mean, there's a lot of visibility into the apps, but it's sort of overwhelming to me. So I haven't really spent a lot of time in that other than set a breakpoint and see what's going on.
Yeah. And so like you said, Xcode does have all of your typical debugging tools that you'd expect from, I think, most IDEs. So you've got, print statements and a debug console that the print statements will dump out to, and setting breakpoints to examine the code. And it has some nice other, kind of visual things where you can examine like the state of all the local variables, or like the variables in that environment and the scope, relative to where you set the breakpoint. So you can see like, hey, like why is this value not, what I think it is? What does this array contain? You can examine objects pretty much like their whole hierarchy. So that's cool. And then you did mention instruments. That even I don't play around too much with the instruments. There's so many. There's a lot that Apple provides, and I think there's also some of them are third party. But so I can't speak too much to those. But even Xcode has a couple of other cool tools. Like there's a UI debugging mechanism. It's like you can freeze your app at a certain wherever you are in it, and it'll show you the UI stack in like a 3D model that you can drag around and rotate, and that you can see like, oh my gosh, my button that I wasn't seeing, it's 20 pixels or 20 points off screen, and it's only 1 point wide, and then so that's cool. Or there's also like a thing that you can pause and get like track down memory leaks in your code. So there's all of that's available just right from Xcode, from the main.
Where's that one?
Which one?
No reason. The memory leak thing.
The memory leaks, yeah. That one, I find it annoying sometimes because it takes so long when you press it, occasionally to actually show up. But it should be, if you're actively running your code, you have like that debug console on the bottom. There's two windows, but either one, and then you have a place where you can step over breakpoints or pause your app. And then it's one of the buttons there. It's like three triangles, I think. Three circles connected. That's the little icon for the debug memory graph.
Okay. I'm using Swift UI, and I think it's just the way Swift UI is, that it has some memory leaks inherent in it. But
yeah.
I do need to track down maybe where they're coming from.
Why are you using Swift UI?
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
It's not that you shouldn't. It's really cool. I'm excited about it. I just haven't sat down and tried to really play around with it yet because it fools so
you.
Different.
It starts out really easy until you try to do something that it's not really well designed to do.
That's exactly how I felt about storyboard. So that doesn't surprise me.
No.
And storyboard, for those who don't know, that's like Xcode's GUI. It's like a drag and drop UI builder GUI. And now they've replaced it with Swift UI.
We didn't talk about that at all.
That's fine. That's 4 other shows.
Yeah, Xcode UI, iOS UI building. Just find a tutorial for that. It's probably not great to talk about over, without any visuals anyways. It's a lot of like this, go to this menu. And
I did have one more question that I just remembered. A lot of times it's not, okay, just make me an iOS app. It's make me a mobile app that runs on everything. Mm-hmm. Is there any best practice for I need an iOS and an Android? And, well, I guess there's nothing else anymore. But it used to be there was Windows
Sidekick.
Mobile. Sidekick was from 2002. Is there any hope for doing anything cross-platform or any advice for how to make that easier? Or is it just get 2 teams and build 2 apps?
Yeah, that's our recommendation always, is don't try to do cross-platform. I'm sure, things keep improving. I'm sure that, there are good tools out there. It's just, and we haven't dug into it super recently. Again, just because it's always seemed like it causes more problems than it's worth to try to do one cross-platform of code base instead of maintaining 2 native ones. And that's usually because no matter how cross-platform it is, there's still this underlying, you have to end up working directly with the individual Bluetooth libraries themselves. And there's a lot of differences between, not a ton, but there are differences between the way Bluetooth works on Android and on iOS. And, for example, iOS handles more of like the one thing that we always have to write for our Bluetooth, we have written for, Bluetooth Android apps is this entire dispatcher library. And that handles dispatching, queuing and dispatching, messages so that, you don't get buffer overruns. And I guess Android just doesn't handle that very well on its own, but iOS does all of that for you. So, that's just one example where I would imagine it'd be kind of a nightmare unless you were able to inject your own kind of layer to handle that in Android, or maybe the cross-platform library handled it for you. You'd end up just doing, it's a lot of headache. So yeah, it's, we always recommend to our clients, we steer them away the second they try to do a cross-platform.
That's good to know. So many times I'm like, you can't have to write 2 apps, but it sounds like, yes, you have to write 2 apps.
You may not start out writing 2 apps, but you'll end up writing 2 apps.
That's exactly
Actually, you probably end up writing 3.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Let's see. You are hiring, or PunchThrough is hiring. Could you tell us what you're hiring for?
Yep, we are currently hiring embedded engineers. So if there are any of you listening who is an embedded engineer and you are in the Minneapolis general area, or you are thinking you want to move there, then please reach out to us. You can just go to punchthrough.com. We have a careers page, or just email us directly. I think info@punchthrough.com or careers@punchthrough.com. I might actually have to check that. So I don't know if you want to strike, you might want to strike that, and maybe I'll just, I'll just look that up later. But
there will be a link in the show.
Yeah, definitely. You can go to our website and go to the careers page.
And is it remote, or you should want to be in Minneapolis? We'd like to hire people in Minneapolis. We used to have a San Francisco office, which is where I came from. But these days we are pretty much fully just Minneapolis with a couple of remote satellites here and there. Okay. And Gretchen, do you have any thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
I would say Bluetooth is, it's a niche space, and it does require a lot of cross-platform knowledge of complex systems. So, don't get discouraged if you're having issues spinning up an end-to-end connected product, or like the whole thing is just feeling really overwhelming. There's a reason we have completely separate teams, full teams dedicated to handling, mobile versus embedded versus hardware. So if you do manage to create something that works even on a small scale on both sides, or even on like one side of the equation, that's still extremely impressive and something you should be proud of yourself for doing.
Cool. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Gretchen.
Thank you guys so much.
Our guest has been Gretchen Walker, mobile software engineer at PunchThrough. Thank you also to Christopher for producing and co-hosting. Thank you to Bailey over at Dojo 5 for pointing me towards Gretchen. Thank you to our Patreon listener Slack group for their questions and for Gretchen's mic. And of course, thank you for listening up. You can always contact us at show@embedded.fm or hit the contact link on embedded.fm. And now a quote to leave you with. Carl Sagan or Dr. Seuss?
I vote Dr. Seuss.
From there to here, from here to there, funny things are everywhere.
Oh, I thought that was from Apple's core Bluetooth talks.
Could be. Embedded is an independently produced radio show that focuses on the many aspects of engineering. It is a production of Logical Elegance, an embedded software consulting company in California. If there are advertisements in the show, we did not put them there and do not receive money from them. At this time, our sponsors are Logical Elegance and listeners like you.